got mail.
Oh boy! My very first Patreon question came in! It's probably just a simple question about voice acting or Dead Rising, but hey, a question is a question, right? Let's see here. Mr. Z the Zombie asks, when a person normally ends up in Silent Hill, they have some sort of dark reason. The person is accosted by monsters and real nightmares tailored to their sin, as well as their personality. The person is also hunted closely by some sort of entity, a nega godmother of sorts, a personal demon. James Sunderland had Pyramid Head and Murphy Pendleton had the Boogeyman. If you were sent to Silent Hill, what kind of monsters do you think you would encounter? And what do you think your personal demon following you around would be like? Holy sh! Who comes up with that kind of question? That's good! Where do I even start? Okay, hold on. I gotta think about this one. Okay, got it! Let's begin! Alright, first and foremost, if many of you aren't familiar with Silent Hill, which I'm fairly sure my Let's Play Dead Rising fans are, but my slightly younger, more pure, miraculous Ladybug Dub fans might not, I feel obligated to warn you up front. Things are about to get pretty dark, and honestly, kind of personal, as is the nature of pretty much anything Silent Hill related, or really, the act of self-examining one's own sins and faults. So if that kind of thing turns you off, I won't think less of you for not continuing onward. However, if that doesn't bother you, allow me to delve right into my deepest, darkest insecurities about myself. This is gonna be juicy! For those of you unfamiliar with Silent Hill lore, Silent Hill is a small little off-the-map town of hellish nature that tailors itself specifically to the lost souls that find themselves there. Troubled people with deep, unresolved issues find themselves in the town one way or another, and through their journey they encounter demons, monsters, and twisted souls that hunt, attack, and confuse them. By the end of the horrific journey, the person who started it either finds some closure or they die in the process and become one of the lingering demons who live there. Well, that's basically it. There's also plots and subplots about weird hippie death cults, drugs in the air, and tainted water supplies, but let's be honest, no one understands any of those.
お前の仕業だったのか?
As for my actually being there, I don't know what reason it could be. I'm certainly not without my demons, but I've generally noticed people who go to Silent Hill are either on the verge or in the midst of a mental breakdown. Considering I've already made my peace with my own psychological oddities, I don't really have much of a reason to find myself there. Though I could think of some circumstances that could change that. But let's say, for whatever reason, or reasons, something so unthinkable and traumatic were to happen to me that I found myself in such a place. What would it be like? What demon would follow me? Essentially, what would my own personal hell be? I can tell you, whatever my reasons for being there, a Silent Hill scenario involving me would be very much unlike the experiences you've seen in previous titles in the series. You have to understand something about my personality, and that is I don't honestly scare that easily. Now, I know that sounds like a very manly alpha male type thing to say and boast about, but in this case, it's actually true. The thought of a city full of monsters and demons between me and my goal isn't exactly the most treacherous to me. In fact, I would dare say a Silent Hill like the ones Harry Mason and James Sunderland experienced would have the opposite effect. Don't get me wrong, the fear of dying would of course be on my mind at all times, but by the presence of monsters and twisted creatures around me, it would allow me to channel all my fear into aggression. I'd be living on a flight or fight impulse combined with a dark sense of humor to cope with my situation. Very much not unlike what you've already seen in my old Let's Plays. Trust me, of all Silent Hill's possible outcomes, I'd fare quite well in James or Harry's worlds. At least I think so. But they wouldn't really challenge me or make me face my fears. You see, the Silent Hill Harry encountered in the first game is perfect for him because he's lost his daughter. The idea of losing his child in the midst of this horrible, hellish, ever-changing, dangerous place filled with unthinkable creatures is probably the single worst torture you could give the poor man. As is partially true for James Sunderland, who cannot cope with his guilt or loss of his wife, which Silent Hill then makes him face by mirroring the horrible dark desires of his psyche and the creatures around him. namely Pyramid Head. But I don't have a daughter that I'm afraid of losing. I didn't do some heinous thing or suffer some unfathomable loss to such a degree that guilt looms over my head every moment of every day. These experiences aren't relatable to me, as so the monsters and horrors Harry and James faced wouldn't be either. But all that being said, there is one thing I am afraid of, much more than any monster or demon, and that is simply myself. You know how I warned you earlier things were going to get very personal? Well, this is why. In order for me to explain myself, I have to explain my psyche, to a point, where I come from, really. And before I continue, I should say a disclaimer that yes, I am a very happy, content, and stable man, despite what this persona will sometimes say for the purposes of your entertainment. I have the friends I have made, the woman I now call the love of my life, and your continued support to thank for this. But everyone has their own dark moments, and I am no different. When I was a child, I lived in New Mexico, just a few miles out of the small town called Pewaukee on an Indian reservation. Being so far out in the country, I didn't really have many friends outside of a few that lived up the street, and going to school every day wasn't really an option with our income at the time, so I was homeschooled mostly. In a lot of ways, I had a great childhood. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I got to see things no other kid did. I got to see ruins, climb into caves, hike on mountains like a little Nathan Drake. I'm sure it's largely where my sense of adventure and passion for history comes from. But one day, at complete random, I collapsed at a very young age and started convulsing. We went to the emergency room, got checked out, and I found out I had a seizure. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time this happened. I had many more, and because of it, we would constantly go to the hospital, consult with doctors, get tested, and try to figure out exactly what was wrong with me. You can imagine this kind of thing was hard for a little kid to accept. After all, I was losing complete control of my body, but as long as I knew what to do about it, I knew I could face it. But that never came. We came and went to the doctor's office. We had test after test done, MRIs, CAT scans, x-rays, you name it. We tested for epilepsy a dozen times, and it always came back negative. My parents were at a loss for what to do, and the doctors couldn't tell me why this was happening to me. I'm not proud to say it, but when I was a kid, I kind of suffered from somewhat of a mental breakdown because of it. I grew paranoid. I was afraid of swimming because I was afraid I'd drown. I was afraid of hiking anymore because I was afraid I'd seize up and fall. I was afraid of sleeping alone in case something happened in the night and no one could hear me. I even started to become afraid of irrational things like shadows my toys made in the dark, the sight of blood in real life or in movies or games. It even got to a point that during one of my episodes, as they called them, I blacked out and started having a bad dream of something laughing and antagonizing me. It all sounds pretty messed up, I know, but it was the regular fears of a little kid, being afraid of the dark and scary movies, stuff like that, clashing with the very real fears of this unpredictable, unexplainable medical problem that none of the adults I looked up to around me could do anything about. But the one thing I remember more than anything else was something I heard a doctor say one day. You have to remember, at this point we had been going to doctor for tests and blood work for months, and we went through our fair share of doctors, but this one in particular none of us liked. I know for a fact since then he's lost his medical license on grounds of sexual harassment or something like that, so he wasn't a very nice guy. But I remember one day I heard him say something to the effect of, "It's just a cry for attention. That or it's all in the boy's head." Now, I know this wasn't actually true, and it enraged my parents, but as a kid who didn't know any better, it really stuck with me. I became increasingly afraid that all my irrational fears, all my medical problems, what if they really were just in my head? It terrified me, and it put me in a very dark place. I resented that doctor for saying that. I resented the pain of taking blood. I hated the fact no one could tell me what was wrong with me. And in order to cope with my fears, I began to take on a different perspective on life. As unhealthy and as scary as it sounds, I genuinely began to formulate another personality, a better, stronger version of myself that could deal with everything I was going through. I created someone that could look even at the prospect of death itself and laugh at it. I created someone who was never scared of anything. All he would do was get angry, and that's exactly what I did. I got angry at myself for working myself into a frenzy and getting scared of shadows. I essentially became a better, stronger person who didn't scare easily and laughed at danger. And because of it, I was still able to get through that time of my life and still enjoyed the little things like adventure and having fun. Since then, thanks to certain people in my life, I learned to be much more sensitive and caring, which unfortunately, I wasn't very after that transformation. And there's no doubting the person many of you know as PhantomSavage is merely an extreme version of that personality I created years ago. But it came at a cost. Ironically, sometimes I get afraid of the very thing I created to stomp out fear. Everyone has a few bad dreams they remember, but any dream for me is somewhat rare because unlike most of my friends, I usually have dreamless sleep. That or I never remember them. Guess that's just the way my brain works, but I do recall one bad dream in particular I'll never forget even to this day. I remember having a dream once about a scenario very much like a slasher movie you would see on TV. Lots of blood, death, that kind of thing, the way bad dreams usually go. But this one stood out to me because I remember I was in a hotel. Everyone in the hotel was a killer from some slasher movie. We're talking like Gregory Horshow on steroids. In one room was Michael Myers, and across the hall was Jason Voorhees. The Hellraiser guy was in another one. I think Freddy Krueger was there. Hell, I think Jigsaw was there too. And of course, I just had to be in this hotel full of crazy supernatural killers, right? But the dream doesn't quite take the direction you think it would. You see, as it turns out, for whatever reason, everyone in the hotel, all the bad guys, didn't have any of their powers. They didn't have their super strength or their weird supernatural abilities, and worst of all, they didn't have intent to kill. In fact, they all felt remorse for everything they had done. It was like all the killers from the horror movies were becoming human and were in this weird, mystical place, atoning for their sins or something like that. But I wasn't. I killed them. I killed them all, one by one, and not quickly either. I remember it was brutal and bloody. I remember that Hellraiser guy actually pleading and begging not to kill him because he was changing and he felt bad for everything he had done, but I did anyway. And not only did I kill him, but I enjoyed it. When I woke up, I cried. The dream was so bad, I just didn't know what else to do. In recent years, I've had similar fears. Not over horrible things I've done or bad dreams, but just a fearful lack of feeling. The last 2 years have been pretty tough with losses to the family, and though I won't go into detail about them, I've often felt horrible about myself for not feeling more, for not breaking down and crying. One of them I didn't cry at all, and they were a huge part of the family. Another time I did, but it took weeks for me to get there. That's my biggest fear. I'm afraid that this mechanism I've hard programmed into my personality for staving off fear has dulled my emotion. I never cry at movies, and even when I lose someone or lose something, I feel like I never feel enough. I worry what that's done to my psyche, and I worry what I've become in that regard. And I worry that if everything in my life were completely destroyed and I actually had a full mental break, I actually have the capacity to become something like that. Which is why in my Silent Hill experience, there wouldn't be monsters. I wouldn't have a pyramid head chasing me around with Paul Bunyan's kitchen knife. My personal demon wouldn't be some twisted creature spawned of my fears or my regrets. My personal demon would be myself. I can think of no greater, more fearsome thing to follow me around the vacant streets of Silent Hill than that terrifying version of me I was in that dream. Or even worse, having become that thing and not realize it. But the funny thing is, there actually is one horror game experience that would summarize my Silent Hill experience perfectly. In fact, most of you already know it well. This is the most terrifying thing I can possibly imagine. There's no city, there's no town to explore here. There's no cave for me to climb or mountain for me to trek across and leave. There's just this damn hallway. This hallway which loops and never ends. The terror that I'm going to find something around the corner sinking in only for nothing to be there. Or worse yet, something horrible like a rattling bloody box. The pictures on the wall and the sounds I hear implying that I did something. Awful.
This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon.
Hurt someone.
Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all.
Someone I love. Or even this thing!
Let me kiss my wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
Yeah, perhaps let's not go to Silent Hill. It is a silly place. Special thanks to Mr. Z the Zombie, who sent in this question via my Patreon. If you would like to ask me a question too, then I encourage you to visit. Should you make the right pledge and ask a good question, I'll eventually include it in a full video with others. Now remember, not every question will have a long response like this one, but in this case it was a very good, deep, personal question that needed some in-depth explanation, so I turned it into a full video. Don't forget, you can also earn a whole bunch of other things on my Patreon, like requesting a Savage play, or even a comic dub, so check it out! For now, I thank you for listening to me ramble on about my shady past and for continuing to support me like you do every day. Good night and Godspeed!